Nora let her feet carry her toward the church building. It was almost midnight, and she was thankful the church was empty. She sat in the front row, her fingers gripping the edges of the seat. Her body trembled, and hot tears streamed down her face. She did not bother wiping them off. Midnight came and went, yet she remained. She had tried to pray, but she could not find the words. The emptiness of the church comforted her. No judging eyes, no whispers, no pity. Here she could let her tears flow freely without shame or having to explain herself to anyone. She pulled her knees to her chest, hugging herself as she wept. The ache in her heart was unbearable. How had it come to this? How had the beautiful life she once had, the life she dreamed of, turned into something so sad? Her eyelids grew heavy. She was tired. The coolness of the stone floor beneath her was strangely soothing. Slowly she sank down, curling up as if making herself small enough would ease the pain. Sleep took her almost immediately, and with it, memories she wished she could forget. As she slept, Nora dreamt she was back in her living room, and Mama Grace was present. She was talking to Daniel with an angry expression on her face. Nora stood beside Daniel, her fingers clenched into tight fists. "You have tried, Daniel," Mama Grace said, her voice calm, deliberate. "But 3 years is more than enough. Try another woman. She is not the only option." Silence. Nora turned to Daniel, searching for the words she needed him to say, for him to tell his mother that he loved his wife, that they would find a way. But he remained quiet. His face was unreadable, his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders slightly hunched. "Daniel," her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Say something." He exhaled deeply but still said nothing. Nora looked between Mama Grace and Daniel in confusion. They were talking as if she was not significant. She did not have a say. Her opinion did not matter. Mama Grace sighed and shook her head. "It is time to consider another wife." Nora jerked awake. Was it just a dream? A sharp gust of wind swept through the church, sending a chill down Nora's spine. Her eyes fluttered, adjusting to the dim candlelight. She was in the church, alone. It was not a dream. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thump of her own heartbeat. It felt like her heart wanted to burst out of her chest. She felt empty. Dragging herself up, she staggered towards the altar, her knees hitting the ground as she clasped her hands together. She shut her eyes tightly, forcing herself to pray, but all that came was a broken whisper. "God, why?" Her voice trembled, the weight of the question heavier than ever. Why had this happened to her? Had she not prayed enough? Had she not been faithful? Why was she the one cast aside when all she ever wanted was to love her husband and to have a family of her own? No answer came, only silence. She lowered her head onto the altar, exhaustion winning over her grief. She had to face the future, whether she was ready for it or not. The sun had barely risen when Nora pushed open the front door of her house. Everywhere was quiet. She paused at the door, waiting to hear Mama Grace's voice, but she did not hear a sound. She could not believe she was afraid to go into her own house. Her home was not a safe space for her. It was a reminder of her inadequacies. She stepped inside, her feet feeling heavy against the cold floor. For a moment she thought she had imagined everything. The conversation, the humiliation, the way Daniel had stood by saying nothing. Maybe it really was a dream, and when she turned the corner, he would be there, arms open, waiting for her. But the house was silent. She walked towards the bedroom and then, from the corner of her eye, she saw him. Daniel. The kitchen door was open, and he was standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn around immediately. Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel," she said, barely above a whisper. He flinched at the sound of her voice as he turned to face her, but he remained silent. "Tell me it's not real," she pleaded. "Tell me last night didn't happen." Slowly, he turned towards her, his eyes filled with guilt, but not love, not the love she had once known. He started, voice hoarse. "I told Mama to calm down." Nora let out a bitter laugh, her hands trembling. "And that is supposed to fix everything?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I didn't know what else to do." "Didn't you?" she shot back. "Because you let it happen. You let her speak for you. You let me walk away." He lowered his gaze. I thought you needed time." She took a step forward. "Time for what, Daniel? To accept that you're going to replace me?" He didn't answer. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm. "So what now?" Daniel hesitated. I don't know." Nora's stomach clenched. She had always imagined that love meant certainty, that no matter what came, Daniel would always be sure of her. But here he was, standing before her, uncertain. Nora swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "You're always quiet. When I need you to speak, you never do. Now you're telling me that you told Mama to calm down. What difference will that make? Calm down for what?" "I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. She turned away, heading for the bathroom. "I need to freshen up," she muttered, "and then I need to sleep." She shut the door behind her before he could say another word, leaning against it, her breath coming in short gasps. She was breaking apart piece by piece, and Daniel sat by and watched. She had never felt more alone. A few days later, Nora sat at the dining table, staring blankly at the untouched cup of tea before her. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt like a prison. Across from her, Daniel shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping anxiously against the wood. The silence between them stretched long and uncomfortable. "We need to talk," he finally said. Nora's grip tightened around her mug. "About what?" Daniel sighed. "About options." She looked up sharply. "Options?" He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "For having a child." Nora felt a lump rise in her throat. "What do you mean options? Every time I bring up an alternative, you shut it down. We've talked about this before. There are medical treatments, IVF, surrogacy." "It's too expensive, Nora," he interrupted. "We don't have that kind of money." "I told you I could cover half." Daniel's jaw clenched. "That's not the point." "Then what is?" she demanded, her voice rising. "What then are the options, Daniel?" He looked away, not saying anything. Nora swallowed the pain threatening to choke her. "You mean you don't want to try the ones I've mentioned?" Daniel hesitated. I don't think it's the right path for us." "For us?" She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Or for you?" "Let us go back to the hospital again," he said. "We can run some more tests and ask about other simple procedures that we can sign up for to improve our chances." Nora pushed back her chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. "I need air." She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving Daniel behind. Sandra's boutique smelled of fresh fabric and lavender-scented candles, which were a gift from her fiancé. Dresses hung in neat rows, their bright colors in stark contrast to the heaviness in Nora's heart. Sandra took one look at her friend and frowned. "What happened?" Nora tried to smile, but it wavered. "Same old story." Sandra sighed and led her to the small sitting area at the back. "Talk to me." As the words tumbled out, tears followed. She recounted Mama Grace's visit to their home. She poured out her heart to Sandra. She was tired, she was frustrated, and she was angry. Angry at the world, angry at Daniel, angry at herself, and angry at God. She felt betrayed by her body. Why couldn't it do one simple task? Just one. "Can you believe I even prayed to God one time to let me have a miscarriage? At least it would prove that my womb is not entirely useless," she cried. Sandra listened, rubbing her back. They were both in tears. "Plus the pressure," Nora whispered. "His family, the expectations. It's crushing me, and all Daniel does is stand by and watch." Sandra squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry that you're going through this alone," Nora sniffed. "I don't know how much more I can take." Sandra pulled her into a hug. "We'll figure it out, I promise." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sickness. The walls were too white, too sterile, making Nora feel even more exposed. She lay on the examination table, her hands clenched into fists. The doctor's voice was calm, explaining the details of the HSG test, but nothing could have prepared her for the pain. The test was supposed to check if her fallopian tubes were blocked, and the instruments placed on the table beside her did not make Nora feel any better. She had heard about the test from different TTC communities she belonged to and had done a lot of research on Google. She knew it was not going to be easy. A very long needle would be used to inject a dye into the uterus, and a machine would observe the movement of the dye. Most women said the dye helped to open up their tubes if they were blocked. Well, here she was. The moment the procedure began, A sharp, searing pain ripped through her. She gasped, her body jerking involuntarily. She had always had a very low pain threshold. "Almost done," the doctor murmured. Tears streamed down her face. She had endured so much already: whispers, pitying glances, sleepless nights filled with prayer. And now this. When it was over, she curled into herself, shivering. A nurse helped her sit up. "Well done, Ma, you tried." Nora let out a weak laugh. Days blurred into weeks, and then into months. Nora barely ate nor barely slept. At work, she couldn't focus. "Nora," she blinked up at Mr. Sam, her boss. He didn't look pleased. "Please see me in my office before you leave today," he said. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She simply nodded. When she closed, she went into Mr. Sam's office. Mr. Sam sighed. "I need you here, Nora. You're one of my best employees, but I can tell that you are distracted. I'm afraid if this continues..." Nora nodded quickly. "I understand, sir, it won't happen again." But deep down she knew. She could not focus. Her mental health was greatly affected. That night, Nora went to church after work. She knelt at the altar, her hands clasped tightly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "God, please, I don't know what else to do. Help me." Many times she had given up on the possibility of hearing from God. She did not know if she still had faith. She just kept going because she had very few options. They say God has the answer to everything, but she did not know what to believe anymore. Tomorrow would be her 5-year marriage anniversary, and even though they did not yet have the child they desperately wanted, Nora wanted to celebrate it with her husband. She had gone to buy the things she would need to prepare a sumptuous dinner. The sun burned hot against Nora's skin as she walked home from the market, the weight of her shopping bag pressing into her arm. The streets buzzed with life, children laughing, vendors shouting, but she felt distant, as if she were walking through a world that she wasn't part of. She had very few reasons to laugh or be happy, but as she observed the children playing, without any worry in the world, she allowed herself to smile. She had barely stepped onto the balcony when she froze. Her bags were outside. The door was ajar. Her heart stopped. Then she heard her. Mama Grace was shouting, "You asked for 2 years, and I gave you 2 years. No more. I say no more." Nora climbed the stairs, stepping into the doorway when suddenly Mama Grace blocked her view. Her breath caught in her throat. Any time Mama Grace visited, it was always trouble for her. She had enjoyed a little peace in the last 2 years. Mama never came around, and even when she called Daniel, she would refuse to speak to Nora. "Your time is up," Mama Grace shouted in her face, clapping her hands together as she spoke. "Carry your bags and go." "No." The word barely escaped Nora's lips. Behind Mama Grace, Daniel stood frozen, his expression unreadable. "Mama, please," he said quietly. Mama Grace shot him a glare. "You told me to give you 2 years, Daniel, and I kept my end of the bargain. Is it not 2 years? Do you have anything to show for it? Or is there a baby hiding somewhere that I don't know of?" she asked scornfully. Nora's world spun. "Daniel," she whispered, pleading, "what is this? What is happening?" He looked at her, his mouth moved, but he did not say any words. And in that moment, she knew. It was over for her. Daniel had negotiated with Mama to give them 2 years, and he had not mentioned it to her. Tears fell from her eyes as she held onto the door. Mama Grace grabbed one of Nora's bags and tossed it down the steps. "Leave." Nora took a shaky step back, her vision blurring. She turned to Daniel one last time, praying, hoping, but he said nothing. The door slammed shut. The streets blurred as she walked, her bags weighing her down. Tears streamed down her face, but she barely noticed. She managed to stop a cab. Sandra. She was glad she had somewhere to go. A friend. She was not sure she could be by herself. She did not trust herself. She arrived at the compound and forced herself to keep moving, one step after another, until she got to her best friend's apartment. When Sandra opened the door and saw her, her face fell. "Oh, Nora," Nora broke down. Sandra pulled her into a tight embrace. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Nora was weeping. Her voice broke as she cried. You could hear the hurt in her heart. Sandra managed to pull Nora and her bags into the house, and they sat down on the sofa holding on to each other. In the days that followed, Nora did not leave the apartment. She barely ate, barely spoke. She took a sick leave from work, but she wasn't sure she would ever go back. Sandra tried everything, talking, cooking her favorite meals, making her laugh, but Nora felt numb. All she could do was cry. One evening, Sandra sat beside her on the couch, taking her hand. "Nora, you can't live like this." Nora stared at the floor. "I don't know how to move on. You have to try." Weeks later, Nora finally left the apartment. Sandra convinced her to go to the mall, just to get out, to breathe. It was supposed to be a distraction. Instead, it became another heartbreak. Because there, standing near the entrance, was Daniel, with another woman, a young, beautiful woman, holding his arm. Nora's breath caught in her throat, her stomach twisted. Daniel saw her. For a second, their eyes met. Then he turned away, as if she were nothing more than a stranger. Nora felt sick. She walked out of the mall, empty-handed, her heart pounding. That night, she sat in Sandra's living room, her hands shaking. "I can't do this anymore." Sandra frowned. "Do what?" "Stay here. Everywhere I go, I see him. It's killing me." Sandra's eyes filled with sympathy. "So what do you want to do?" Nora swallowed. "I don't know, but I can't stay here. If I run into them one more time, I will lose my mind." Sandra hesitated. "What about a transfer? You've worked for over 5 years with your company. I think they will approve a transfer." Nora nodded. She had lost everything already. Maybe starting afresh in a new environment would be good for her. She hoped so. The new city felt different. The streets were unfamiliar, the people distant. The air was freer, no judgment, no gossip. Yet somehow the pain followed her. Nora settled into her new apartment, but it didn't feel like home. She still missed Daniel terribly and the life they shared. She spent her days drowning in work, throwing herself into reports, meetings, and emails just to keep her mind from drifting to the past. It worked, sometimes, but the nights were the worst. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, she would wonder, did Daniel ever think about her? Did he regret what he had done? Did he hold his new wife at night the way he used to hold her? Her heart ached with questions that had no answers. She barely made friends in the new city. It was easier that way, less chance of hearing stories that would reopen wounds. The only person she spoke to regularly was Sandra. "How are you?" Sandra would ask over the phone. Nora would force a small smile. "I'm fine." She wasn't. But what else was there to say? Time passed in slow, painful waves. It was already 1 year since Nora's marriage hit the rocks. Then one day Sandra called. "I've fixed a date for my wedding, and I want you to be there." Nora's heart clenched. That's wonderful," she said, trying to sound excited for her friend, and keeping her voice steady. Sandra hesitated. "Nora, I know this might be hard, but I really want you to come." Nora closed her eyes. She had avoided going back for so long, afraid of the ghosts waiting for her. But Sandra had been there for her through everything. She couldn't say no. The wedding was beautiful. The church was filled with flowers and music, the air alive with laughter and joy. For the first time in a long time, Nora felt a little happiness in her chest. She was glad her friend was getting married, until she saw him, Daniel and his wife, pregnant. Nora's body went cold. It was real. The proof of everything she couldn't give him was right there. She avoided being seen by them. She would not be able to bear the shame. She found Sandra in her changing room. "You didn't tell me he'd be here," she whispered, accusingly. Sandra's face fell. "I didn't know how." Nora swallowed the lump in her throat. "I need to go. I can't stay here." Sandra reached for her hand. "Nora, please." But she was already walking away.